It's Monday, August 1st. They're the worst floods they've ever seen, and it's still raining. We start here. As the water levels rise in Kentucky, so do the death tolls.
Tell us what you're doing out here today.
Well, we're searching for my brother-in-law.
Cataclysmic weather is targeting some of the poorest spots in the country. Our team is there in the flood zone. President Biden has COVID again, kind of.
Sometimes it doesn't involve symptoms at all. Sometimes it's just simply a positive test, which is what we saw.
What you should know about rebound cases, and the majority rules, but that could mean the supermajority disintegrates.
Now you're going to get this bill passed, and you know, with Democrats only, and you expect us to then join up with you for other stuff? We don't want to do that.
Are Republicans angry enough about a landmark climate and health care bill that they would back out of a deal to help veterans? From ABC News, this is Start Here. I'm Brad Milkey. Most natural disasters don't discriminate, right? Tornadoes, hurricanes, they just tear everything up in their path. Floods, however, do discriminate, not because water chooses where to go, but because humans choose where water will go, and they choose where to place communities downstream, which is why so often when extreme flooding hits a city, it's the city's poorest residents who are affected. Late last week and then into the weekend, as rainstorms began pounding eastern Kentucky near the Appalachian foothills, the water levels began rising in some of this nation's poorest counties.
The whole life is gone.
I don't know where to start, what to do, where to go.
Now, we're seeing the death tolls climbing, and guess what? The rain has returned. ABC's Mola Lenghi has made his way into one of these towns in eastern Kentucky. Mola, where are you right now?
Well, right now we're in feisty Kentucky, but we have been throughout Knott County, which was one of the hardest hit areas here in eastern Kentucky. At least 20 people have been declared dead. And it's community by community is just miles and miles of devastation. It was an overnight phenomenon that happened.
One point we looked out the front door, and mine and his cars was playing bumper cars, like bumper boats in the middle of our front yard.
We've heard countless stories of people who, within minutes, saw water starting to come into their homes.
Got a family trapped in a home, standing on the counters, water's almost over the counters.
And within a few more minutes, they're on top of their roof seeking refuge. So it happened quickly. A lot of folks did not have time to prepare.
We had to swim out, and it was cold. It was over my head.
Probably one of the worst disasters around here in probably history, I'd say.
It's devastating. You know, there's the physical destruction, the dozens and dozens of cars, for example, that are just flipped over and littered in waterways, the homes that were ripped off of their foundations.
Tell us what you're doing out here today.
Well, we're searching for my brother-in-law.
And then there's what the floods have done to people's lives. You know, obviously in worst case scenarios, people were killed.
He was trying to get his wife and son out of his house, which was surrounded by water.
In some cases, they literally lost everything.
It's devastating to lose something you worked your whole life for.
We talked to a florist. They were in their 50s and 60s. They had run this florist shop all of their lives since they were 16 years old, but it was a 100-year-old florist shop.
And it just hurts that we can't help the people who's hurting now.
This town in particular, the town of Heinemann, them being the only florist, they're able to show up honoring someone who has passed or someone who is grieving or trying to make them feel better by giving them flowers. But all of their flowers were wiped out.
You feel like you're losing a family home here.
Yeah. Because now I don't have, the customers can't come in and feel at home.
And as far as the next 24, 48 hours are concerned, I mean, is the worst behind these people, or could this get even riskier for families here?
Yeah, there's still the threat of rain here over the next few days.
The people of the region, there's going to be some more rain today. It could be localized flash flooding, and that's not fair. But we will get through that. And the next thing we got to deal with is it's going to get really hot during the course of this week.
The water has certainly receded a lot, but it's still a little higher than it normally is. And people are on edge. And just the threat of rain or the threat of another storm, that's certainly a cause for concern. These people have been traumatized.
This county and this region has been hit harder than any of us have ever seen, maybe harder than any of us thought was possible.
And then, I was in Kentucky actually after tornadoes came through in December, and people were already talking then about how this extreme weather is hitting communities, especially poorer communities, the hardest, because like your houses aren't as sturdy, maybe they're not as connected, maybe they don't have as much insurance, et cetera. What happens in these areas, in some of the state's poorest counties, when they're hit by floodwaters? Is there a sense of how kind of desperate this has left people?
Yeah, it exposes the vulnerabilities. Everywhere you go, everywhere you talk to, they'll tell you their story, they'll tell you what happened in, horrifying and gut-wrenching detail. But the question after that is always, what now? What happens now? We already had nothing. We had so little, and we lost that.
I know a lot of areas were affected by COVID, but it really affected this area as far as businesses, school systems and things. And all of our schools got flooded but one.
In the whole county?
In the whole county.
One
school left.
These are poor communities, old coal mining towns, aging populations, few economic opportunities. The little that they lost was all they had. A place like that may never be the same. These people are resilient. They want to rebuild. They're out here helping each other, and neighbors are helping neighbors. But there is clearly a need.
People lose something, they can't just go out and buy it again.
No, there is not. We don't have Walmart. We don't have big grocery chain stores. We just don't have them. And then the people that lost everything don't have the money to do it.
I don't know if you can blame the fact that they were vulnerable prior to this on the flood. The flood doesn't strike vulnerable areas necessarily. It's a weather phenomenon. But what it does is the day after the fact, then you see how vulnerable they are, because what next?
Right, we'll continue to see how these next couple days of rain actually affect these communities. Mola Lengi there in eastern Kentucky. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next up on Start Here, no one likes finding out they're in a rebound relationship, especially if it's with a coronavirus. We're back in a bit.
More Americans choose ABC News, America's #1 news source.
This is ABC News Live.
The crush of families here in Poland.
At refugee centers.
In Putin's Russia.
On the ground in Ukraine.
Close to the front line.
Here at the White House. Destructive Cat 4 storm.
Here along I-5. Boston is in the bullseye.
Let's go. We made it.
ABC News Live, America's #1 streaming news. Anytime, anywhere. Streaming 24/7, straight to you for free.
Thank you for making ABC News Live America's #1 streaming news.
Admit it, these days, what you need to know
seems to change just about every day.
What is it that you really want to know, need to know?
To help you not just get through your day,
but to make the most of it. Feel smarter.
Feel better.
Feel happier.
Well, how about a third hour of Good Morning America?
GMA 3, what you need to know. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
It's all about you.
You never know what you're going to get on this show. That's all I'm going to tell you.
Yes, Whoopi! This mic on? Can you hear me out there?
Behind the scenes is always a better show.
Absolutely, absolutely.
That's what people don't see during the commercial break.
Right, they don't.
What happened?
I had no idea really what I was getting myself into.
That day that we walked out, I treasured that day. I couldn't sit there.
You're doing good, Joy. You're doing good.
Oh, yeah, baby. It was crazy.
Behind the Table. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
National parks are incredibly safe places. A crime will happen.
Hey, Mama. My wife has fallen. She's in really critical condition.
At that time, I thought it was just a tragic accident. There's still a lot of questions we need to ask.
There were small things that didn't totally add up.
This is 2 lives for Harold that have died now.
I was shocked.
Something's not right.
Thursday night.
We are going to Hollywood.
This is where dreams are made and crushed. Like his.
He wants to be a star.
But
I was not terribly impressed by Zach's acting.
This man was terrible.
This is where things go off script.
He was living the life of a Hollywood mogul, and he was a 2-bit criminal.
Nobody saw it coming.
The performance that he gave investors, Meryl Streep could never.
They lost everything.
The Con, Thursday night on ABC.
We're honored. ABC News Live, nominated for 5 Emmy Awards for Excellence. The only streaming news receiving any nominations. Thank you for the honor 5 times over. And thank you for making ABC News Live America's #1 streaming news.
It's It's alarming when anyone catches COVID. It's especially alarming for a 79-year-old with perhaps the most important job on earth.
This morning I tested positive for COVID.
So, everyone breathed a big sigh of relief when President Biden said he had COVID, but that his symptoms were mild. And then a few days later, when his symptoms were gone and he was testing negative.
I've just tested negative for COVID-19 after isolating for 5 days.
Health officials used this as a teachable moment. One of the reasons Biden made it through so well, they said, was he was vaccinated and double boosted. Furthermore, he was on a treatment called Paxlovid. The thing is, some people who have taken Paxlovid have ended up experiencing a lull in their symptoms, testing negative, only to get a case of so-called Rebound COVID a few days later. And this weekend, the White House announced that once again, the president is positive. Let's go to Dr. Darian Sutton. He's an emergency physician who's been stationed in COVID wards from New York to LA. He's also an ABC News contributor. Dr. Sutton, I'd love to ask you just a few questions because on its face, this can seem like a really bad advertisement for a drug that is supposed to help lower the chances of hospitalization. So how common is Rebound COVID?
Well, this is an important topic to discuss because it's more common than people think. To start off, Paxlovid is an antiviral medication, and the purpose of it is to be given early on in the COVID infection to suppress viral replication, to essentially allow your body time to recover more quickly. Within the studies for Paxlovid, scientists saw approximately 1 to 2% of cases resulted in something that we call Rebound COVID, which is when the symptoms start after the completion of the Paxlovid course.
I reverted back to positive by the antigen test. So it was sort of what people are referring to as a Paxlovid rebound.
Now, many have theorized why this could be, some of which included things such as maybe there's not a long enough duration of the medication. Maybe it needs to be more than 5 days. Or maybe the amount or dose of the medication needs to be changed to do a more effective job. But what's really important to acknowledge is that even though we've seen a small percentage of these cases that experience this rebound COVID, it does not negate the benefit of Paxlovid.
Paxlovid succeeded in helping me get through the course really rather unscathed.
Which is the main purpose, keeping you out of the hospital and protecting you from death.
What's happening when you get rebound COVID? Like, what does that mean that the virus, like the viral load goes down and then back up? What does that mean?
Great question. So essentially what you can imagine, or the way that I think of it, is that Paxlovid is suppressing that viral replication, allowing your body to develop those protective antibodies and other important parts of your immune system to protect you and provide safety so that you don't progress to severe disease. Now, what seems to be happening is that after the cessation or completion of the medication, there's still small amounts of virus left within your body. The theory is that that virus then replicates and causes rebound symptoms. As we saw over the weekend, as reported by the case of the president, sometimes it doesn't involve symptoms at all. Sometimes it's just simply a positive test, which is what we saw.
And are you contagious? Like, you still have COVID, right? But the White House says the president also has no symptoms. So are you contagious when you get one of these rebound cases?
I would consider a person contagious if they tested positive within the 14 days of their initial diagnosis of COVID-19. So the general recommendations that have been given by the CDC is that 5 days after your initial diagnosis of COVID-19, your symptom onset, you can go out into the community, but it's instructed that you wear a well-fitting, high-quality mask. And I think the extra thing that you should do is rapid test yourself at that 5-day point, because the rapid test or rapid antigen test is looking for signs of viral replication. So if that is negative, you can assume that you are not infectious. But if that is positive, I would recommend that you complete the full 10 days.
Like, if you got enough to test positive on that, you probably have enough within your system to be contagious to other people as well.
Exactly. I love using rapid antigen tests as kind of a surrogate to understand whether or not you're infectious. That's why I like to use them before events and other things, so that they're not as accurate in the long run, but they're really helpful in the immediate terms to understand level of infectiousness.
And then you kind of just touched on this, but just so I'm clear, does that raise questions over someone who's just had COVID or just tested positive, like President Biden? He's testing negative at first, but is there a chance then, you've been on Paxlovid, that you're going around spraying COVID around everyone? Should people just be wearing masks for the entire time until it's been, like, I don't know, 10 days or 2 weeks or whatever it is after that initial diagnosis, even if you're testing negative or not showing any symptoms?
I personally think that within the 10 to 14 days even of your initial diagnosis and symptom onset of COVID, you should be practicing the highest level of caution. We can only assume that having a negative test makes your level of infectiousness low enough so that you're not going to be a cause of risk for the people around you. But personally, given that what we've seen and what we don't know in this pandemic and how this virus can change, especially in the setting of the Omicron variant, I'd recommend that within the 10 to even 14 days of your diagnosis of COVID-19, you continue to wear that well-fitting mask around others to decrease your risk of transmission. How infectious an individual is, it's really difficult to tell, I have to say. We can use those tests as a helpful reminder of whether or not someone is truly infectious, but like you said, at the end of the day, we truly don't know. And so I'd stick to being cautious.
Right. And doctors have been really taking the last few days to tell people this drug works and it is helpful. If the goal is to keep people out of the hospital and keep them from dying, the drug is doing its job. However, this rare effect where someone can become re-positive is something to look out for. Also, it doesn't taste that great. But again, keeps you out of the hospital. It's worth it, according to health officials. Dr. Darian Sutton, really helpful as always. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, just to toot the old horn for a second, if you haven't listened to Friday's episode about climate change and the use of solar energy and how that's created legit family feuds in small towns, you should really check out that episode. And wouldn't you know, right as we were putting the final touches on that show, Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia was shocking everybody by agreeing to this huge Democratic spending bill that will push clean energy in a way it's never been pushed before in this country.
We're basically investing in reliable energy, making sure that we use our fossil fuels as clean and cleaner than any place else in the world.
That U-turn from Manchin actually set off a flurry of activity and anger on Capitol Hill, and that anger could actually have real ramifications for other really important bills. So let's get this all sorted out with our lead producer on Capitol Hill, Trish Turner, is with us. Trish, let's just start with this bill itself, right? Because it's not quite Build Back Better, but it's got a lot of the same items that President Biden wanted, right?
Oh, that's absolutely right. In fact, a lot of people euphemistically are calling it Build Back Manchin because Senator Manchin, he was at the heart of striking this deal. It's decidedly smaller than, we started off, it's hard to remember, but $3.5 trillion down to $2 trillion to $1.7, and now we're even below that. And so, it spends about $433 billion. It brings in about $740 billion. So this is really slimmed down, but there's some major provisions in it.
We're giving Medicare the power to negotiate for lower prescription drug prices, which means seniors and consumers will pay less for their prescription drugs.
I've been covering Congress a long time, and from all that time I can remember, Democrats have been fighting to let Medicare negotiate the price of prescription drugs. This has the potential to pass on major savings to a lot of seniors, and it caps their out-of-pocket costs for drugs at $2,000. That's really big, too, for a lot of seniors on fixed incomes.
This bill would be the most significant legislation in history to tackle the climate crisis and improve our energy security right away.
And then there's $369 billion for climate and energy provisions, just like you were talking about. Now, that is the biggest investment in climate change this country has made ever.
This is not adding to inflation. This is going to help take us to a place of prosperity. I truly believe in my heart.
They also take about $300 billion and put it toward deficit reduction. That was really important for Joe Manchin. There is a major provision in it, a tax increase. Democrats don't want to call it that, but it's a big minimum tax, a 15% minimum tax on big corporations. That's going to pull in a lot of money that allows them to do all of the climate and energy provisions that are in the bill. But those are pretty much the big ones.
And so if this was a bill that is being pushed through the reconciliation method, right? So with budget bills, you just need 50 votes and not the 60. Does that mean this will pass? Like, was Manchin being the 50th vote the only thing that needed to happen here to get this going?
No, and this is what's surprising. So Senator Schumer has been in back rooms and Zoom calls because Senator Manchin and Schumer have each had COVID. They've been talking for weeks and weeks and weeks, but they left out one key conservative Democrat, Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona. She doesn't like one of the provisions in this bill at all.
I will only support tax policies that promote growth and economic stability. So I am unwilling to support any tax policies that would put a brake on that type of economic growth or stall business and personal growth for America's industries.
But it is strange that Senator Schumer didn't also loop in Kyrsten Sinema into this conversation.
Right, that she's like one of the linchpins here. Like she's just learning about this with the rest of us. Hey, what's interesting here is how this is Biden's pride and joy, this bill, and yet Manchin came out and basically said, like, these negotiations, they were me, they were Chuck Schumer, White House wasn't involved, they could have mucked it up if they did get involved. But I don't even have time to ask you about all the Democratic politics here, Trish, because there are Republicans involved now that are threatening to derail other bills because of what happened here. What happened? What ticked them off so much?
Oh boy, when this first was announced, it's 5 o'clock on, in the afternoon on a Thursday, we were all, they had just passed this major China competition bill.
The motion is adopted.
We're all kind of referring to it as the CHIPS bill because it's a massive investment. It's a highly bipartisan bill, massive investment in chips, fabrication plants.
The slumbering giant that is America has finally awakened to the challenge that we face from the People's Republic of China.
We could say, let corporate America do it on its own, but it's a brand new world with nation states trying to overcome us, and many of them are authoritarian.
Massive bipartisan victory, but moments after, the next day, all of a sudden, you have to remember Senator McConnell said, I'm going to stand in the way of this big bipartisan bill until Democrats say we are not going to go forward with that massive tax and spending spree that they're calling, Build Back Mansion or whatever it is.
Rather than everybody down and here we go again, I didn't want to go through that. So I wanted to see if we could come to that agreement. I thought it fell apart.
People were wondering right away, Brad, if Schumer and Manchin had played McConnell. This never happens. Like, I've never seen that. He does the playing. He doesn't get played. They, absolutely are adamant that is not what happened, but it's having the effect of potentially poisoning the well for other bipartisan things, like the Electoral Count Act, which sort of fixes some January 6th related stuff. A lot of bipartisan support for that. Manchin's involved, but his Republican counterparts have said, hey, wait a minute, we don't like what you just did. You turned around, now you're gonna get this bill passed and with Democrats only, and you expect us to then join up with you for other stuff. We don't want to do that.
This bill is not only unnecessary, it's more of the same. It's yet another effort to delegitimize the Supreme Court.
Respect for marriage is another, codifying same-sex and interracial marriage. But they need 10 Republicans. Democrats need 10 Republicans. I could say that on any given day.
I urge everyone, every Democrat, every Republican to vote yes, keep our promise to our veterans.
And there's also a big question mark hanging over. It's called the PACT Act. It's essentially a ton of money to finally help veterans who have been injured, killed because of toxic burn pits that result from burning all this stuff in war zones.
But this type of cruelty on those that we say we hold up as our most valued Americans, then what are we?
Comedian Jon Stewart, his sidekick John Feel, they have been a former veteran. He's a big in 9/11 circles. They fought for healthcare. They're fighting for this legislation. Well, Republicans sidelined this bill last week in a surprise move, and they're saying it's over this budgetary gimmick.
They have put their politics before the life and well-being of service members who have given everything to this country. For what? For what? For some political stunt?
They're starting to wonder, the goalposts keep moving. First, it was a vote to end this little budgetary, quote unquote, budgetary gimmick, or at least try. And now, yesterday on some of the Sunday shows, the lead Republican in that effort said, well, Republicans actually want 2 or 3 amendments. So what is it? Are the goalposts moving because Republicans are angry, or are they legitimately moving to have some votes on some issues that are of concern for them, and then they might ultimately vote to finally pass this bill?
And it all just shows you how intense the backlash has been, right? Over this simple majority method to push through the president's agenda. So intense that Republicans would consider perhaps torpedoing some very bipartisan bills as punishment for it. Trish Turner, thanks a lot.
Always a pleasure, Brad. Thanks.
And one last thing. When's the last time you loved a job so much that you would just work there for free? And if you are someone who's experienced that job somehow, was that at a fast food restaurant?
Chick-fil-A feels like one big family.
Recently, a Chick-fil-A in Hendersonville, North Carolina put out a call on its official Facebook page. It said, "We are looking for volunteers for our new drive-thru express." These would be the type of people directing traffic during that busy lunch rush, but instead of getting paid in cash, these traffic directors would be getting paid in chicken. Specifically, the post said their volunteers would earn 5 entrees for their 1-hour shift.
It's despicable for any employer to not pay somebody who's working for them, let alone a corporation as big as Chick-fil-A.
Which set off some clucking in the labor world. After all, Chick-fil-A is one of America's most popular brands. The company's worth $14 billion. Why can't they pay their people in cash? Now, it's important to know that some Chick-fil-A's are owned by the corporation. Some, though, are franchises. The company says this location is a franchise that's owned by one person who does his own hiring, sets his own pay scale. And some people thought this post must have just been a poorly constructed Facebook post from a local business until Vice got a response from the owner of the store, and he defended this idea.
The store manager said the offer was meant for people who think it's a good fit for them and was different than the full or part-time employment.
He said successful brands build connections with communities, and sometimes members of those communities want to be part of the brand. They want to get involved. He said they'd done this sort of volunteer program before, and people had a blast.
It's not illegal to volunteer, but it's illegal to volunteer for a for-profit private sector business, which is what Chick-fil-A is.
That admission that they'd hired volunteers multiple times ruffled the feathers of labor experts because, according to the Fair Labor Standards Act, a for-profit company has to pay its employees in cash. That's the law. No volunteering allowed, and certainly no poultry as payment. The Hendersonville location has since taken down this post. They've referred all interview requests to the corporate office, but remember, corporate office says this is up to the franchise. Talk to them. And in this weird economy where we could be heading into a recession, but employees have never been harder to hire, in fact, this location actually just raised wages to $19 an hour, it might still be too much to ask employees to just eat more chicken. I will say, though, I do feel like there are dads out there somewhere who just want to direct traffic, right? Like they see a parking lot being poorly run, they're ready to hop out of their car with everyone else going like, does this guy just drive around with an orange vest ready to go? Maybe that's the kind of volunteer that this restaurant was looking for. I don't know. Start here tomorrow. Hit that follow button if you haven't already. I'm Brad Milkey. See you tomorrow.